And let's go. That is so exciting. I love to see that genuine moment between that son and that dad, and just really how God can use dads to speak life into and over their children. You know, we are made in the image of God, and we talk about the Imago Dei, that God created with words, and he has allowed us to create with words as well. We've been talking about the role of a father when it comes to education. We heard from Reverend Tony Suarez earlier about his role as a dad. And so now we're here with Esmeralda Sanchez, and we're going to hear from the daughter's role, which is a little bit different, because you have a message for dads. So what tips do you have for dads?
Well, I want to highlight something that Reverend Suarez mentioned, and just that shame narrative. So I recently read a report by fatherhood.gov that talked about this shame narrative that Latino fathers tend to have. And there might be that shame that maybe I dropped out of high school, or whatever their education level is, maybe they didn't have an opportunity to advance in their education, and they feel that they can't speak into their sons or daughters' lives in that area because they feel that they don't have the experience. So how can I tell my daughter, how can I tell my son to value education, just like Reverend Suarez was talking about. But what's interesting is that that same report highlights that in order to build resiliency in children, in their families, resiliency is the ability to overcome challenges, to believe that you can overcome challenges, and do what it takes to do that.
Yeah.
One thing that actually builds that resiliency in families is a strong sense of spirituality. And so what this report might interpret was call a strong sense of spirituality. We know that that's a relationship with God. Right. That's a relationship with Christ. Right. And so fathers have a huge role in encouraging their child by showing them to love God and one to pray, you know, to pray to the Father to change that narrative and to redeem it, and to do that in front of your kids. Yeah. I remember, you know, I would come into the living room and I would sometimes see my dad praying, praying over the family, praying over our home and our education. And so I'm so thankful that my dad did that, because I could see through that example that he loved the Lord. Another thing that my father taught me was that he worked with excellence in his job. So I always saw my dad seeing how he could do his work better. You know, he was a welder, and he was always looking to see how he could do his job better. And he also, even now, I always see my dad learning. So he's got his iPad now, and he looks up YouTube videos, and my dad's a musician and a singer. So he's looking up YouTube videos and, you know, playing guitar chords. And, you know, all of that is about learning, you know, how to educate yourself in different areas. And my dad has taught me that, and to work with excellence, like I said. And so modeling those things.
You know, I think about a family tree and how God uses fathers so often to change the direction, the trajectory of their families, and how I look at my grandfather who, you know, finished up through the 8th grade, and then he went on to get his GED and to do college courses, but later in his 60s, 70s, and he continued to learn. But then he instilled such a love of learning and using your mind in his sons, and his sons went on to pursue higher education. And so I think there's something about when fathers speak, because you mentioned about them praying, and I think that we are hungry for fathers to speak, to share, to hear them pray, and that we hear their voices. And I think that's really important, because it's kind of scary sometimes, because sometimes some dads are enthusiastic and loud, and that's their personality, but some dads are quieter and more internal processors. They're thinking inside, and they care just as much as the loud, boisterous dad. But they're thinking on the inside. But I think it's a good message for us to hear that both are valuable, but that words really do matter. There's power in hearing your dad pray for your home, or seeing that example, like you said, about even if it's not within I mean, welding is different than what you pursued,
Right.
but that same technique of perfecting, I see, I get to work with you and I see that you instill that same value, that same principle into your work as well. So
I think a dad's affirmation is so important.
Yeah.
And telling your son or daughter, Mija, I'm proud of you. Mija, I'm so glad you're doing well. Or,
you're on the right
hey,
track.
you're on the right track. I know that my dad's actually one of the more calm fathers and patient.
Yeah.
But I could tell that my dad really valued my accomplishments. He would say, Mija, can you give me a copy of that paper that you just published? I want to show my supervisor. I told my supervisor that you just graduated from Southern Methodist University. And so those words of affirmation, or just knowing that my dad cared, and knowing that my dad cared enough to share with others, about me, was just so affirming. And the words of a father are so powerful. And so I agree with your assessment there.
Yeah, that the affirmation part is so true, and that we really are hungry. And maybe for those kids that don't have a dad at home, God is strategically placing someone in your life to affirm that in you. And so we want you to know a little bit about what's happening across the country that churches are participating in. So listen and take a look at the Faith and Education Coalition.
The biggest problem in our educational system today is the lack of equality. We have children in certain areas of our country that receive one degree of education, while children in the urban centers primarily receive another sort of education, one that is diminished and diluted. We have educational inequality.
We still have segregated education in America, not just in terms of one race being in one school and another being in another, but the standards are different. Invariably, when you have majority black, brown schools, there are lower standards.
I think that our biggest problem with our education system is that in different school districts, different states, the goalposts are in different locations.
We're failing our young people. They're graduating from school, being passed along without the proper training to live their life successfully.
This is a crisis. It is a serious crisis that must be addressed as expeditiously as possible. Hence, we are here launching the Faith and Education Coalition, a biblically based Christian coalition, multi-ethnic kingdom culture committed to raising the standards across the board.
Whenever the church gets involved, things happen and change. I mean, I know my father, Martin Luther King Jr., was the head of one of the preeminent movements for social change in the world. And it was faith leaders who led that movement. And so we need the faith community to get involved, and get involved directly. I have a favorite saying, and that is, be a king and raise the standard. That's what we need in America.
Welcome back. We have been talking about the role of a father, and got to hear from Reverend Tony Swatis earlier, and then you got to share a little bit about your dad. You were just sharing with me that another way that dads can really model for their students how to learn. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so like I said, my dad only got a 6th grade education in Mexico, but here in the States, at his church, he actually graduated from the Bible Institute at the church. And so he advanced his education in that way, and advanced his knowledge in Scripture in that way, and that was an example to me of him pursuing education and continuing education in that way. So
that's powerful.
Those are examples that
we see raising highly capable kids by Focus on the Family, and so they are going to different churches, and parents are participating in these really powerful parent universities, and it's just been really neat. You see parents are doing, have regalia on their graduation, they get their certificate, and there's just different ways that we can model for our kids that learning matters to us, and that using our minds to love the Lord completely with the totality of our minds is so critical. And so another thing that just stands out is Tony really talking about perseverance and setting a goal for yourself as a parent. And so we want to encourage you, if you're watching, set an educational goal for yourself and talk to your students about that. Invite them to pray for you and with you. We want to continue to encourage you to raise the standards at home as you equip your children to love the Lord with the entirety of their minds. We'll see you next time.